Snow fell in ragged sheets, carried by a merciless wind that howled across the high ridges of the Montana Territory. Rachel McGraw pulled her children close, her threadbare shawl stretched thin against the storm's teeth. Eli, 10 years old, trudged with jaw clenched, trying to shield his little sister from the blast of white. Annie's small boots disappeared in the drifts, her cheeks red with cold, breath wheezing in tiny clouds. Rachel's own hands were raw and cracked, the knuckles bleeding from days of pulling at the broken wagon until she had been forced to abandon it. All that remained to her now was what she could carry: a few quilts, a small Bible wrapped in cloth, and the 2 children stumbling to the blizzard beside her. She had not always been this way, hollow-eyed, lips cracked, pride bent low. Only months ago, she was the wife of a man who had promised her a homestead carved from the wilderness. Samuel had been stubborn, too eager to stake his claim. He had also been unlucky. A band of road agents cut him down on the trail in broad daylight, left her with debts and a patch of land too easy for creditors to seize. She had buried him with her own hands, then faced the humiliation of watching men from town strip her farm bare. What pride she had left had carried her this far into the wilderness, though each step now felt like another lash against her will. The storm thickened. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, blurred her vision until every shape looked like a tree twisted in torment. She prayed silently that her children's legs would keep moving. Her own felt leaden, numb from the knees down. Eli stumbled, but caught himself before she could cry out. He looked up at her, his eyes pale and hollow with hunger, and asked, "Ma, how much farther?" She could not answer. Her lips parted, but no words came, only a shallow gasp that stung her lungs. Through the haze of snow, she saw a light. A lantern swung outside a squat building, smoke curling from its chimney. Hope surged, sharp as pain, and she guided her children toward it. The structure resolved into a trading post, built from rough-hewn logs, the door weathered by years of storms. She lifted her hand, knocked, then leaned her forehead against the wood, as if it might swallow her whole. The door opened. Heat rushed out, carrying the smell of tobacco, whiskey, and smoked meat. Inside stood 2 men with greasy hats pulled low. One of them looked her over with a smirk, his eyes lingering on her thin frame. "What be we here?" he drawled. "A lost bird in the snow." "My children," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Please, we need food, just a bit to carry us through." The second man chuckled, his teeth yellow. "Ain't no charity out here. Best keep moving. Lady, storm don't last forever." Rachel clasped her hands together, head bowed. Humiliation burned hotter than the cold. She was on her knees in front of strangers, her children watching her beg. "I'll work. Anything. We just need." The man shoved the door shut. The latch clicked, final as a coffin lid. She stood in the snow, staring at the roughwood until the light blurred. Eli pressed against her side, small fists clenched. Annie whimpered, hiding her face. Rachel turned them back into the wind. Her tears froze before they could fall. They did not walk long. Her knees buckled, sending her into the snow. She forced herself up, muscles screaming. When she stumbled a second time, strong arms caught her beneath the shoulders and held her steady. She twisted, startled, and found herself staring into the face of a man who seemed carved from the very mountains. His beard was grizzled, his hair long and dark with streaks of silver. A scar cut across his cheek, vanishing into the shadow of a fur collar. His eyes were gray, steady as stone, watching her without pity yet without cruelty. He said nothing at first. The storm swirled around them, and in the silence Rachel's heart thundered. She clutched her children tighter. We're fine," she managed, though the words tasted like a lie. The man studied her a moment longer, then shifted Annie into the crook of his arm, as though she weighed nothing. His other hand gestured toward the shadow of trees. Through the flurry she glimpsed the outline of a cabin, smoke curling faint from its chimney. "Cold kills quicker than pride," he said, his voice roughened by years in the wild. Rachel wanted to resist, to cling to the last shreds of her dignity, but Annie's small face pressed against the stranger's chest, already drifting toward sleep. Eli's lips trembled from the cold. Rachel nodded once, unable to speak, and let the man guide them. The cabin stood apart from the world, half buried in snow, its roof sagging beneath the weight. He pushed the door open with a boot, ushering them inside. The warmth struck like a blow, sudden and overwhelming. A fire burned in a stone hearth, flames snapping, casting long shadows across walls hung with pelts. A rifle rested above the mantel, gleaming in the firelight. Rachel lowered herself near the hearth, gathering her children close. She dared a glance at their host. He moved with slow, deliberate motions, hanging his snow-damp cloak, setting aside a bundle of traps. He did not speak again. Instead, he ladled broth from a kettle, set 3 bowls before them, and stepped back. Rachel's hands trembled as she lifted the spoon to Annie's lips. The little girl sipped greedily, color returning to her cheeks. Eli followed, devouring his portion. Rachel herself barely swallowed a mouthful before tears blurred her vision. The man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them with unreadable eyes. He seemed untouched by the storm, part of it, like an ancient tree that had bent to every wind and still remained standing. "Why?" Rachel whispered, unable to hold the question. His gaze shifted to the fire. "Cold kills quicker than pride," he repeated. The flame snapped, a fragile light against the weight of winter. Rachel stared into them, her exhaustion pulling her down. Yet inside her something stirred, a faint echo of safety, of warmth she had thought gone forever. The fire was small, hardly more than a handful of wood, but it burned steady. She clung to that image as her children curled into her arms. For the first time in months, she let her eyes close, knowing they would wake to see another day. The stranger remained in the shadows, silent, watchful, like a guardian cut from the wilderness itself. And outside, the storm raged on, beating at the walls, unable to break through. Morning came slow, gray light seeping through the frostbitten panes of the cabin window. Rachel stirred from a restless doze. Her children curled beside her on a bed of furs. The fire had dwindled to embers, yet warmth still clung to the room. For a moment she thought herself alone, then caught sight of man. Jed Coulter, she would later learn, sitting on a 3-legged stool near the hearth, sharpening a knife with steady strokes. His eyes flicked up once, acknowledging her wakefulness, then returned to the blade. Rachel rose carefully, tucking the quilts tighter around Eli and Annie. The floor was cold against her bare feet. She stood awkwardly, hands folded before her, waiting for instruction that never came. Jed finished his work, set the knife aside, and moved to the door without a word. When he opened it, the storm greeted him with a snarl of wind. He stepped out as though it were nothing. Rachel stood frozen, uncertain whether she was guest or burden. Her pride ached from the night before, yet necessity bound her here. She searched the cabin with her eyes. Rough logs sealed with mud and moss, pelts hanging from pegs, a table scarred by years of use. Everything spoke of a life stripped to the bone, built by a man who owed nothing to anyone. She wondered why he had opened his door to her at all. When he returned, a stack of wood rested on his shoulder, snow glittering on his beard. He dropped the logs near the hearth. "Fire's yours to tend," he said, voice low but certain. "Keep it fed." Rachel nodded quickly, grateful for a task. She knelt, arranging the logs over the embers until flames leapt again. The children stirred awake, stretching with small groans. Jed poured water into the kettle, set over the fire, and retrieved strips of dried meat. He laid them on the table, no ceremony, just sustenance. Eli reached for a piece, but Rachel caught his wrist. "Mind your manners," she whispered, ashamed of her son's hunger showing so plain. Jed only grunted, pushing the meat toward them. Eat. Work after. Through the day, Rachel sought ways to prove her worth. She tried hauling water from the creek, nearly slipping on the ice. Jed took the bucket from her without scolding, showing her how to brace her feet, how to carry with the weight balanced against her hip. She chopped wood, swinging the axe too close to her boot. Jed steadied the tool in her grip, muttering, "Blade's no good if you don't respect it." She flushed at her own clumsiness, but listened. The children adapted quicker. Eli shadowed Jed as he checked traps strung along the tree line, asking questions the mountain man answered with curt nods. Annie followed Rachel, gathering twigs, humming to herself. Despite the harshness of their host, the children seemed unafraid. Rachel envied their ease. That night, while the wind clawed at the shutters, Rachel tried again to thank him. She waited until the children slept, then spoke softly. "You've given more than you had to." Jed's eyes lifted from the fire, their gray depths unreadable. "Storm took choice away. You and yours would have been dead out there. I'd still like you to know my gratitude," she said, voice trembling with honesty. Not many would have opened the door. He studied her a long moment, then turned back to the fire. "Don't mistake it for charity. Everyone pays their way here. Even you." His words stung, but beneath them Rachel heard something else. Not cruelty, but a creed born of survival. She bowed her head and resolved to learn. Days stretched into a rhythm. Rachel's hands blistered from splitting wood. Her back ached from carrying water, but slowly the tasks became less foreign. She set her first snare with Jed's guidance and returned hours later to find a rabbit quivering inside. Her heart swelled with triumph. When she brought it to Jed, expecting indifference, he nodded once. "Good catch." It was the closest thing to praise she had heard from him. The children thrived under his quiet instruction. Eli learned to track deer prints, his small face serious with concentration. Annie grew fond of the old hound that slept by the hearth, curling against its side at night. Rachel watched him change and felt her own fear loosen, though shame lingered. Shame that she could not give them what the stranger did so naturally. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. One afternoon, while Jed skinned a fox outside the cabin, the sound of hooves cut through the stillness. Rachel stiffened, pulling Annie close as two riders approached. Their coats were patched, their eyes hard with hunger and malice. "Fine setup you got here," one of them called, sliding from his saddle. His gaze fixed on Rachel, lingering too long. "Didn't know you kept company," called her. Jed rose slowly, knife still in hand. "Pass on," he said flatly. The man spat into the snow, grinning. "We'll take a drink first. Maybe share some of that fire." His partner laughed, circling his horse closer to the cabin. Rachel's heart pounded. She felt exposed, judged, as if these men could see every humiliation carved into her past. Eli stood frozen, fists balled at his sides. Annie buried her face in Rachel's skirt. Jed stepped forward, his frame broad, the knife gleaming. His voice dropped, colder than the wind. "Ain't room for trouble here." For a moment silence hung heavy, broken only by the creak of saddles. Then the first rider's grin faltered. He mounted his horse again, spitting once more. "Another time, mountain man." With a sharp tug on the reins, the two rode off, their laughter fading into the pines. Rachel exhaled only when the sound was gone. She turned to Jed, wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. His face gave nothing away. He only wiped the blade clean and went back to his work, as if the moment had been nothing. That night, Rachel lay awake long after the children slept, staring into the fire. She replayed the way those men's eyes had crawled over her, how easily danger could have breached their fragile shelter. Yet Jed's silence had driven him off as surely as gunfire. It was not desire that kept him watchful, she realized, but principle he lived by, that no one should be wronged under his roof. Her gaze lingered on the rabbit snare hanging by the door, her first small victory. It reminded her that she, too, could learn to endure, to fight for what remained. The shame that followed her like a shadow began to thin, replaced by something steadier, harder to break. The fire crackled, casting his figure in long, shifting shadows against the wall. Rachel closed her eyes, knowing the storm outside would never fully end, but perhaps here, within these walls, she could begin again. Winter pressed harder with each passing day, the sky heavy with clouds that never seemed to empty. Snow piled against the cabin walls until Rachel felt buried alive. Yet within the rough-hewn shelter a rhythm had taken hold. She rose before dawn, stoked a fire, fetched water, and mended clothing by dim lamplight. The children worked beside her, Eli setting traps under Jed's watchful eye, Annie gathering twigs with solemn pride. Their small victories gave her strength. Still, unease shadowed each moment of peace, for she knew danger did not vanish with the storm. That truth came clear one morning when hoofbeats broke the quiet. Rachel froze as two riders emerged from pines, the same men who had taunted them before. Their coats were stiff with frost, their faces sharp with hunger and something darker. They reined in near the cabin, the snow crunching under iron shoes. "Coulter," one called, his voice carrying mockery. "We've come to collect what you owe." Cabin the stout don't spring from nothing. His gaze slid toward Rachel, bold and invasive. "And look here, you've even got yourself a lady now." Jed stepped from the porch, rifle balanced easily in his hands. His expression never shifted, yet the air thickened with tension. "Ain't nothing here for you." The second rider laughed, showing broken teeth. "We'll see about that. Winter's long. We'll be back." With a jerk of the reins, they turned, snow spraying as they vanished among the trees. Rachel's stomach knotted. She watched Jed lower the rifle, his jaw set like stone. No words were exchanged, but she read the truth in his silence. Trouble would return, and when it did, mercy would be scarce. That night, as the fire cracked, Rachel whispered, "They'll come again." Jed's eyes lifted from the flames. "They will." "Then what are we to do?" she pressed. His gaze held hers, calm but unyielding. "Same as always. Stand our ground." Rachel wanted to ask how long a woman and 2 children could keep standing, but she swallowed the words. She understood now that despair was as deadly as cold. Days later, another trial struck. Annie began coughing in the night, her small body shaking, her skin hot as the flames she huddled beside. Rachel's fear clawed her raw. She pressed damp cloths to the girl's brow, whispering prayers, but the fever raged on. Jed watched, silent as ever, then left the cabin before dawn. He returned with a pouch of dried herbs, their smell bitter. He boiled them into a dark tea, forcing Rachel to lift the cup to Annie's lips. The child drank, coughing between swallows, then lay back weak and trembling. Rachel sat through the night, eyes burning, the sound of her daughter's shallow breaths cutting deeper than any insult she had endured. She looked at Jed, who sat across from her, arms folded, eyes fixed on the girl. "You've no reason," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "No reason to care." Jed's eyes flicked to her, steady and quiet. "Don't need one." Something broke open in Rachel then. Not despair, but recognition that this man bore more than scars. He bore solitude like a second skin, yet still he stood watch over a child not his own. When Annie's fever broke at last, Rachel felt her knees give beneath her. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Jed did not speak, only set another log on the fire. The glow filled the cabin, wrapping them in fragile warmth. In the days that followed, Rachel saw him differently. She noticed the careful way he mended a broken snare, the patience with which he showed Eli to steady his aim with a bow, the scars that crossed his hands like a map of old wounds. She wondered what losses had carved such silence into him. One evening, while the children slept and the storm howled beyond the shuttered window, she dared to ask, "You've never had a family of your own?" His hand paused over the knife he was sharpening. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, low and rough, "Never had a partner. Never trusted enough to try." Rachel's breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but the weight of his admission hung heavy. She reached for the cup beside the fire, their hands brushing into passing. The brief touch startled her more than any storm. Outside, wolf tracks scarred the snow near the treeline. Eli had pointed them out earlier, his face pale. Rachel could not shake the image of predators circling, waiting for weakness. The thought bled into her dreams. Wolves prowling at the door, men with hunger in their eyes. Yet when she woke in the night, she found Jed still at the hearth, rifle across his knees, the firelight carving his face into planes of resolve. For the first time since Samuel's death, Rachel believed they might endure. But the peace was fragile. She knew it, felt it in her bones as surely as the wolves scented blood in the drifts. Trouble was circling closer, and when it came, it would not be turned aside by silence alone. Dawn broke gray and brittle, the kind of light that gave no warmth. Rachel stirred from uneasy sleep, listening. At first, only the pop of the fire and the children's soft breathing filled the cabin. Then came the sound she feared, the slow crunch of hooves in snow. She rose, heart pounding. Jed was already at the window, rifle in hand, his jaw set like stone. "They've come," he said, voice low. Rachel's blood ran cold. She pulled Eli and Annie close, wrapping them in quilts, urging them to the far corner of the cabin. Her hand shook, but she forced her voice steady. Stay hidden, no matter what you hear. Outside, the riders assembled, their figures black against the endless white. For this time, not two. Their laughter carried, mean and careless, sharp as a wind. One of them called out, "Coulter, you've been keeping treasure up here, and we've come to claim it." His eyes cut toward the cabin door. Jed stepped outside, snow crunching under his boots, rifle held firm. The storm of silence that followed seemed to still the very trees. Rachel watched through the cracks in the boards, breath shallow. "Not a thing here belongs to you," Jed said. The leader grinned, teeth flashing. "That woman inside, them brats, world ain't kind to strays. Maybe it's time you learned to share." Rage flared in Rachel's chest, but terror bound her voice. She could do nothing but watch as the men spread out, circling. Jed's stance hardened. The rifle cracked, sudden thunder, and one rider toppled from his saddle, the snow blooming red around him. Gunfire answered, sharp and wild. Splinters burst from the cabin wall as bullets struck. Rachel pulled the children tighter, whispering prayers. Jed moved like a man carved from war, firing, ducking, reloading with grim precision. Yet the odds were heavy. A shot tore into his shoulder. He staggered but did not fall, teeth bare against the pain. Another rider charged, pistol raised. Rachel's gaze darted to the pistol Jed had laid by the hearth. Her hands trembled as she seized it. She had never held a weapon before, never fired. But when Annie whimpered against her, fear turned to steel. She rose, stepped to the doorframe, and leveled the pistol with both hands. The rider burst through the snow, face twisted with hunger and malice. Rachel squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, nearly wrenching from her grasp. The rider pitched sideways, crashing into the drift. Silence followed, brief and terrible. Her breath came ragged, smoke from the barrel curling like a phantom. Jed glanced back at her, surprise flickering across his face. Then the battle raged on. 2 men remained. They pressed hard, bullets tearing through the cold air, the smell of powder thick. Jed fought them off, but blood darkened his coat. His strength waned. Rachel fired again, the shot going wide, but it gave pause. Jed lunged at the opening, driving his knife into one attacker's chest. The man fell without a sound. The last rider, seeing his fellows down, wheeled his horse, eyes wide with fear. He fled into the trees, snow flying in his wake until he vanished. Silence returned, broken only by the wind's low howl. Rachel's legs shook, the pistol slipping from her fingers. She stumbled to Jed, who knelt in the snow, blood staining his side. His face was pale, lips tight against pain. "Jed," she dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound, heat and life seeping through her fingers. Her voice cracked. "Don't you dare leave us." He met her gaze, gray eyes softening. "Guess I found a partner after all," he murmured. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them, fierce as a storm. "And we'll keep the fire burning." They dragged him inside, Rachel working with desperate strength to bind his wounds, Eli following every instruction, Annie clutching her mother's skirt. Through the long night, she kept watch by the fire, feeding it log by log, as if its survival was tied to his. By dawn, Jed's breathing steadied. His color returned, faint but certain. Rachel slumped with relief, her exhaustion deep but bearable. The children curled beside him, as if his presence itself promised safety. Weeks passed, snow thawing slow. Rachel grew surer in her work, splitting without falter, setting traps with deft hands, guiding Annie and Eli through chores with calm patience. The shame that had once been her was gone, replaced by the quiet pride of survival. Jed healed, though the scar would never fade. He took to sitting on the porch when the sun broke through, his gaze sweeping the valley. Rachel often joined him, her hands busy with mending, her heart steady for the first time in months. One evening, as shadows stretched long, she stepped outside carrying a bucket of water. Jed looked at her, his face unreadable, but his eyes held something softer than words. He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing around hers, and for once she did not resist. They sat in silence, the children's laughter drifting from inside, the firelight glowing steady through the window. Beyond the clearing, the wilderness stretched endless, wild and unforgiving. But within the cabin walls, warmth endured. The fire burned bright, no longer fragile, but steady, eternal. Rachel lifted her eyes to the drifting smoke curling into the sky, and for the first time since Samuel's grave closed, she felt the future reaching for her. The snow might fall again, wolves might circle, but they would face it together. That, she knew, was a legacy worth leaving. And in the hush of twilight, the mountain man sat watch, not alone anymore.